Good morning, everyone, and welcome. My name is Cassie Chambers, and I'm the Operations Director at the South African Depression and Anxiety Group. Thank you for joining us for this important public webinar as we officially launch SADAG's 2025 Festive Feelings survey results. As we step into the holiday season, a time associated with joy, connection, and celebration, the typical hallmark movie of what Christmas is supposed to look like. We also recognize that for countless South Africans, it's a period marked by mixed emotions, anxiety, financial pressure, loneliness, and overwhelming stress. At SADAG, we witness this daily with the very emotional landscape that December brings. We hear from those that feel excited and hopeful, as well as from those thousands of people who call out and reach out to SADAG every day who are just trying to survive the season. This is precisely why this survey and these results are so significant. With over 2,000 respondents across the country, the study really gives us one of the clearest pictures yet of what people are actually feeling behind the festive season facade. So this launch is not only important for SADAG and for our online community, but it's also vital for HR managers, for team leaders, for teachers, parents, community leaders, faith-based organizations who all support people during this time. And these insights help workplaces understand why employees' stress peak during December. They help community and faith-based organizations recognize the silent struggles that people bring into gatherings over this time. They also help parents understand the pressures their children are facing, and it also helps mental health professionals and loved ones know when someone may be at risk of withdrawing, disconnecting, or turning to unhealthy coping mechanisms. So today's findings really highlight who is thriving, who is coping, and who feels completely overwhelmed. They show the impact of financial strain, family conflict, safety concerns, gender differences, and mental health challenges, while also revealing the importance of a reset, which I know we'll unpack more in today's session. What's really important is that this webinar is not just about numbers, but it's about giving voice to the lived reality of South Africans and equipping them, each and every one of us, leaders, families, professionals, and communities, to respond with more awareness, compassion, and support during one of the most emotionally loaded times of the year. And as always, we want to remind everyone joining us via Zoom or on Facebook that SADAG's 24-hour, 7 days a week helplines and support services will be available and running throughout the festive season for anyone who feels overwhelmed, anxious, or alone. So thank you again for being here. Let's begin. So this morning, I have the privilege of introducing our main speaker, our research extraordinaire, part of the SADAG family, Dr. Bronwyn, I'm going to get this wrong, and we've been practicing and testing it, Drozanovsky-Fenter, who'll be presenting the results today and has prepared a research report and an infographic of the stats and findings, which we will make available to everyone who's attended the webinar today. We also have it available on our webinar toolkit, so you're able to share it, go through the data and the information. I wanted to introduce and give a little bit of background into our speaker today. Dr. Bronwyn holds a doctoral degree in health sociology and is currently a senior research associate at the University of Johannesburg. She has written and published in the fields of masculinity studies and is focused on emotional labor. She has been connected to SADAG for over 2 decades and has published extensively in the mental health matters journals. She's also lectured at both universities of the Witwatersrand in Johannesburg and is also the former co-chair of the Mancosa Human Research Ethics Committee and is the long-term project lead of the University of the Western Cape Student Mental Health and Wellness Project. Dr. Bronwyn, thank you so much for your time this morning and for joining us. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you, Cassie. Thank you absolutely everyone for being here. You know, before I even start thanking the press team at SADAG for their extraordinary work in not only convincing people, but also quite gently persuading so many thousands of people to respond to the survey. I'd also just like to thank each and every one of you for being here. It's very close to the 16th of December. That's sort of a mental period where we all start thinking, okay, we're just going to get to the 16th. And thank you for giving me one of those busy, hectic hours that I know are filling up your life between now and the 16th of December. And then my thanks again to the SADAG press team. You know, Cassie talked about over 2,000 valid responses. Wow. I'm here to tell you we had 3,144 people notice the survey, think about participating in the survey, and only just shy of 300 said, don't have time for you. The rest really thought about it, but it's quite sad in a way that over 3,000 people, close to 3,000 people, were interested enough to click on the link, just didn't have the time to complete the survey. And so I really feel quite responsible for the 2,095 who did complete valid responses. And by valid, it just means people who managed to get through the whole long questionnaire that we set for them. We said we needed 5 to 10 minutes of their time. And it's really quite interesting to me that even in 2025, none of us actually have that 5 or 10 minutes to spare. It's precious, and the insights are equally precious. I'm going to share a few slides, so please let me know if you can see my screen. That should be available to you now. There we go. Are we okay, Cassie? Can you see my screen? Wonderful. All right. So there's so many facts and figures that I want to share with you that I could probably keep you here until after Christmas. And I'm not going to do that, I promise. I'm going to try to get through the main aspects of this. So, as Cassie had previously mentioned, one of our main purposes, in fact, SADAG is always unique in this regard and has been for the longest of times, wanting to have something solid and evidence-based from which to work. So, of course, SADAG has all of its own internal evidence, years and years of experience in supporting people and staying open through the festive season. But you know, the thing about SADAG is that everyone at SADC wants that up to the minute information. We want to know exactly how to answer those calls. We want to know exactly where the vulnerabilities lie. And we want to therefore know how best to tailor the offerings, which is what's so extraordinary about this, is that it does allow us to do that. But what it also allows us to do, and you'll forgive me for being a little bit academic just for 2 minutes, is it does allow us to actually contribute to the story about mental health around the festive season. And particularly, we see that a lot of the stories that are told are quite northern centric. So the main story is, well, there's seasonal affective disorder, there's not enough sun, people don't exercise, people break their routines, people drink too much, people either see too much or too little of people, and seasonal affective disorder takes hold, and it's not going to be anything other than a blue Christmas. And I think that we've got scholars like Lee et al., for example, who put something in the BMJ last year, looking at what was going on in the global north and the global south. So I got quite excited thinking, right, we're going to be recognized. And to some extent we were, because through the data, what Lee et al. Were able to find out was that contrary to what happens in the global north, in South Africa, we see suicide risk go up on Christmas Day itself and on the weekends around it. Now, we've got some wonderful local researchers like Koot Bedien et al., who put together this amazing mortality study in 2020. And what they discovered is that our suicide risk in South Africa is highest in the months of December and January. So this is the sunny time in South Africa. We can't say seasonal affective disorder is to blame. What do we do? And what northern-centric researchers say is, oh, well, South Africa is a poorer country. That might have something to do with it. Or maybe people's education levels have something to do with it. Or maybe it's a gendered response. Now, what we do see globally is that men are always at greater risk for suicidality. And that's a consistent aspect. So we have to then ask ourselves the question, not only what's happening on Christmas Day, but in particular, what's happening to men and women on Christmas Day. And that's part of the Christmas carol or the festive fable that I'd like to add to today as we talk through these findings. So we did something as we always do. We did an online survey, but we also had our wonderful team from our container support services go out into our communities like Diepsloot and Ivory Park and collect hard copy data. And while we don't have many thousands of responses, it's quite an interesting foil for the findings that we're going to talk about today. So just keep that in mind as we go through it. This is supported research, and I will say that while we've seen the average number of callback requests across the survey, which is roughly 1 in 4 callers like to be called back for additional support, which we do offer, and I'm so grateful because we do touch on quite sensitive issues, so supported research is key. The other side of it is that we did see at times as many as 7 out of 10 people who responded asked for a callback, which is quite an intense number of people feeling that as the Christmas day was approaching, there was some tension that was approaching as well. So, just to give you a quick sense of who we talked to, we're not saying that we spoke to every single person in South Africa. This was not a census. And in many respects, this is a self selected sample made up primarily of the SADAG online community. What's interesting is that you'll see that we've got an age distribution that's quite broad. So we've got people ranging 18 all the way to 65 plus. And what's useful about that is we can sort of work out which of these age categories are more or less sensitive or more or less vulnerable. Now, the Coot-Bedien study that I mentioned from 2020 is really interesting because they looked at mortality figures from 1997 till 2016. And they concluded that the people who were the most vulnerable were people aged 15 to 29. Now, we don't have 15-year-olds in our study, but what we are seeing 10 years later is that 26 to 35-year-olds in our study were the ones who reported the highest levels of psychological distress. Now, when you think about that, it makes a lot of sense because it's 10 years on from the Coot-Bedien study. So our age category, 26 to 35, is the one we should be focusing on instead of 15 to 29, because what? They've gotten older. So it's very, very important to have this up to the minute set of findings because it helps us to sort of stretch the ideas. In terms of our biological sex distribution, we've only really got males at 14%. So that's a bit of a worry because, as I just said in my introductory preamble, we want to know why men are susceptible to suicidality on Christmas Day. Fortunately, though, statistically speaking, 14% is enough to be getting on with. And because we've got such a large survey sample of 2095, we were able to draw some interesting conclusions about men. While our race distribution is not reflective of the whole country, I'm very happy to report that this is one of the nicest race distributions that we've ever had before. So, in other words, we've got sufficient representation across different race groups, and that's really useful. In terms of our provincial distribution, well, it shouldn't be surprising to those of you that know SADAG research. We've got the stronghold provinces, which always come through for us in an online survey. And of course, it's bumped up slightly higher in Gauteng because that's where our containers are located. So if there are any funders on board who'd like to know more from other provinces, please do fund some additional containers for us and we'll do the research to prove that our services work. However, what we do see that's really useful is we've got responses from across every one of the provinces in South Africa. And under other, you'll see that we then do sort of talking to people in the broader SADC as opposed to SADC region. And then also from as far afield as Mauritius, people were responding to our survey calls. That was quite exciting. In terms of employment, we do have a fair number of unemployed people, and the economic pressures of the season can therefore be accounted for. Although it's quite interesting that even pensioners and retired people struggled a bit financially, in the sense that there was a loneliness that came from their children living abroad and a lack of funding to bring their children back home for the holidays and a lack of funding to go and visit other people. So even retirees were sort of struggling through the festive season, even though they had an opportunity to build up some wealth. Then we sort of looked at this notion of active parenting. Now, I'm the parent of people older than 18, and I still feel very active. But I think that when we think about active parenting, we think about when kids are in school. So when you've got minors under the age of 18, because that places that unique January of school fees on people. So I think that that was what the basis was of our distinction there. Okay, now let's take a look at the psychological well-being. How are people doing? I'm so impressed with this figure that says that 54% have not been professionally diagnosed and 46% of our sample have, because there's almost this misconception sometimes that SADAG is for people who've been diagnosed and it's not for me, and my mental health has got nothing to do with SADAG. Your mental health has everything to do with SADAG, and that message is getting through. Now, one of the reasons why we really like to look at professional diagnostics in terms of what people are diagnosed with is that we ask them about their current level of psychological distress using the Kessler 10 items scale. And, if someone says, I feel depressed, well, that's well and fine, but are you clinically depressed or are you just feeling a bit low? And it helps us to see and almost cross validate in our sample to see how are people feeling and what is coming through quite strongly. So we'll see in our top 6 mental health conditions, depression is absolutely at the top. And if you take a look at our top 3 Kessler items, feeling tired for no good reason, feeling that everything is an effort, and feeling hopeless, come out top as well. So you can see that we're almost cross validating ourselves here. When we think about stress, it is a stressful time of the year. And anxiety and depression, I mean, we separate them because people do get separate diagnoses, but we all know by now that anxiety and depression are mutually reinforcing. And so when we look at the Kessler, what we're trying to do is we're trying to say, who's feeling distressed right now? And then we try to dig deep into why. A part of why is that they might be depressed, stressed, anxious, experiencing panic, burnout, or bipolar disorder. But we didn't just look at those top 6 mental health conditions. We also looked at sort of lesser conditions. And when I say lesser, they're in no way less important, but they're lesser numerically. So, in other words, they were below 5%. And it's actually quite interesting that some of those lurking below the 5% limit, things like OCD and addiction, will become more relevant as we tell this festive tale. So when we think about it, right, here's the big reveal. What are people feeling? Can we put them on a feelings continuum? And to a large extent, we can. I will give the respondents an absolute round of applause for being able to describe how they feel about the festive season in one single word. I mean, that's an extraordinary thing to be able to say how I feel about the next few months in one word. And we found that we had individuals who were surviving. They were the individuals who were anxious, depressed, annoyed, miserable, concerned, unhappy, frustrated, worried, drained, broken, exhausted. But I don't find those particular words to be negative. These are people that are in the mix, that are expressing what they're feeling and that are in touch with their feelings. They might not necessarily be happy feelings, but there's a connection, and that's really important. When we think about others, we see, and if you look at the word cloud, you'll see that we've been a little bit, we've tried to be a little bit clever. And what we've done is whenever the words are larger, they loomed larger in terms of their frequency of response. And when the words are smaller, they were perhaps less frequently reported. So we'll see that our green words, there are fewer of them, and they're not as large in size as our red words, which tells us across the board that people are struggling. However, it's not a one-sided story. There are a number of people that when they anticipate the festive season, they're excited, they're optimistic, they feel blessed, grateful, calm, and hopeful and happy, and they see it as a time for family. So it really does show us in one simple diagram just how people can feel quite differently about the same set of stresses or the same set of events. Now you'll see my white words. Why are my white words so important? Because we're talking there about disconnecting. So whether you're surviving or thriving in this festive story, you are still connecting to your emotions. When you are disconnecting, you're sort of saying, I'm unsure, blah, indifference, nonchalant, I don't care, I don't want to be part of this. And why are those white words so important? It's because they more often than not characterize how the men in our sample are feeling. So there's a feeling of disconnect. For people who are thriving, it's definitely not a case that they're wealthy. In fact, we'll see that people who are thriving sometimes will say, look, I'm going to make it work. It's a special time of year. And, I just don't want to say at beginning to next year, I want to finish the cycle strong. Then the people who are surviving is often people who are unemployed, although again, people who are thriving can be unemployed and people who are surviving can be employed. It just depends on how they're framing it. But we do see from this one particular female respondent, she said her feeling about the coming festive season, it's overstressing due to unemployment. I can't afford to buy my kids what their heart desires. Prepare for next year as one of my daughters going to high school. Like, it's just too much for me right now. I can't even buy groceries, just heartbreaking. So even though she's surviving, it's a struggle that's multifaceted. And why this is so important is that we can't just have a crude representation of poverty. We can't just say, well, poor people struggle and rich people are fine. Or if you've got enough money, you'll be okay. If you've got enough money, of course, there'll be less financial stress and pressure. We're not ignoring the economic realities in our country at this point in time. But what we are suggesting is that there's a relative deprivation that comes into play. Just because this mom is unemployed and just because she's extremely financially stressed doesn't mean that she doesn't see what her children's hearts desire. And so there's a nuanced understanding of how unemployment and poverty could affect people's festive feelings. When we look at disconnecting, we see that there's a similar economic pressure on men, but it's sort of slightly differently viewed. So I wish it can pass because I don't have money to spoil my family, and they are expecting a lot from me. And this is where it got really interesting to look at the word cloud, because the word disappointed came across in the female responses. The word disappointing came across in the male responses. And so there's almost this masculine fear of letting people down. Women are also afraid of letting their children down, but they are pushing, they're continuing, they're trying, whereas men are saying, I need to disconnect. Now, let's take a look if there are any ghosts of Christmas past that are shaping these festive feelings. 73% have experienced January, and I'm surprised that it's that low. In fact, amongst all of us at SADAG, we were expecting it to be 100% of people experiencing some form of January. But what's really interesting is to see in previous festive seasons is that only 48% of people overspent. So it's not a case of you're irresponsible and you're spending too much. What's the connection? And when we delved into the data, we saw the connection really did have a lot to do with being an active parent. So if you had children who had to get to school in January, the worries around school placement, the worries around trying to afford school transport, because if your child is placed too far away, how are you going to get them there and back? The worries around basic things like school bags, stationery, and the like were very, very apparent. So January is not just about overspending in December. It's about that constant concern about what's going to happen next. And if you think about our word cloud, you'll see that, as Cassie mentioned, it's so important to reset. But nobody's talking about getting that reset. I had one out of 2,095 people who said, well, when I get my Christmas bonus, it might help me to reset. One person thought about resetting. Nobody else found it possible to reset. So I think that when it comes to that financial reset, we're so busy catching up that it's not so much about overspending. In fact, many people are concerned that they won't make ends meet, but it's also that relative deprivation that stretches from Christmas all the way into the January of the new year. Now, another interesting set of coupled statistics here on this part of my slide is that 58% say that they rested far too little and they started off the new year exhausted. And yet 44% said that I rested well. Now, I'm not the world's best mathematician, but 58 and 44 don't equal 100. So what's going on? I think what it's saying is that even though I've rested, I haven't rested enough. So I've rested well, but insufficiently. So it's not just about time in terms of January, it's also about energy. And time and energy work very, very well together. So when we look at how we're going to cope with the festive season in relation to past festive worries and past festive experiences, we need to look at how we conserve time and money, because both of those factors play a role in setting up an effective reset. Now, I just wanted to, just while I'm talking about this idea of resetting from past experiences, letting this new experience be something of a reset. In the Global North studies, we find that people don't tend to take their lives over Christmas and New Year's because there's this idea that there could be a new cycle or a new start. And so people are suggesting that we'll say, I'll hang on. I won't do anything to harm myself until the new year. If the new year goes well and there's a bit of a reset, then people experience that reset as positive and the suicide risk drops. But if the new year goes badly and it isn't the reset that it was promised, then we get what we call the broken promise effect. And then people tend to want to take their lives. But the broken promise effect doesn't seem to be working amongst us South Africans. We don't really care. We're just going straight through. We're just marching straight through into 2026. No one's trying to reset. Everyone's just scrambling around and busy and worried and stressed. And some of us are excited and some of us are ambivalent and some of us are disconnecting, but none of us are resetting. So when we talk about the reset, we do need to be quite cautious. We can't be draconian. We can't base it too much on our previous experiences. We've got to try and build something new, but not anything punishing. So that's quite an interesting aspect to consider. Let's come to the ghosts of Christmas present and perhaps slightly into the future. What are people worried about? People are really concerned about having insufficient funds to spoil others. That's by far at 69% our highest. But we do have other worries which people raised, and a number of people said it really well when they said, I don't have enough money to spoil myself. I don't have enough money to do anything that I want to do. So there was an extension of this idea of relative deprivation. There was definitely absolute poverty. People were worried about buying basics, groceries, buying units for electricity, etc. So we're not denying that poverty is playing a role. But what we are saying is that maybe there's a slightly different story here. When we asked people in Diepsloot and Ivory Park how they felt about the upcoming Christmas, I was quite surprised to see person after person wrote happy. Men and women wrote happy. And so I thought, well, correlation doesn't always equal causation here. Just because someone is poor doesn't mean that they're framing their upcoming Christmas anticipation in the same way. Are they anticipating joy or are they anticipating difficulties? So that was really, really quite interesting. What we saw from our online responses is that people were worried that they might be lonely. But at the same time, they were almost equally worried or slightly less worried about family conflict. And I wondered about that. What's driving the family conflict? So, again, when we asked them to suggest other or additional worries, people talked a lot about grief and loss and the way in which it was configuring family dynamics, the way that that missing person was no longer going to be a buffer between you and that difficult relative, or the missing person was going to leave a vacuum that people were going to scramble to try and fill, or people were being to be disrespectful in their memory of that person around Christmas. Some people felt, well, I want to talk about my relative who's passed away. Others didn't want to talk about that relative at all and were worried that family members would have conflict around those issues. But when we look at feelings of loneliness, what was really important, coming back to this idea around men and women were statistically equally worried about being lonely at Christmas. How does that work? Women have all the social capital. I mean, how does that really operate for us? So when we think about it, remember, social capital is never free. So women in our study are talking about how they've got to gain and maintain the social capital through this overwhelming amount of work during the festive season. They're going to be busy, 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 and who's going to take care of them? And there's a feeling of loneliness in the crowd. So there's a feast and famine, right? So there's a lack of true connection, but there's a lot of company for women. For men, loneliness was coupled more with isolation. One man said quite interestingly, I hope my ex-wife will borrow me my kids this year because I don't get to see them. Another young man said that he was feeling socially isolated because he'd lost his job and his girlfriend's treating him terribly and he can't afford to go home. So he was feeling an intense sense of isolation. What the men were talking about, though, was also their own disconnect, because for them as men, if they didn't have enough money to spoil people at Christmas, that was it. That was the end of the story. They had nothing more to contribute. And I found that to be quite worrying, that men didn't find themselves to have any inherent value. Were the women valuing themselves inherently? No. they were only valuing themselves through labor and hard work through Christmas. So that's also a bit concerning. But what was interesting is that the woman listed their unemployed status or their economic difficulties as lower down on their list of priorities, and they listed connection and seeing others and being there for others as higher up. So it's not that women are not in any difficulty or are not stressed about their finances. They certainly are. But they're more concerned about connection as a femininity signifier. And that tells us something quite important. Unlike men, women were much, much more worried about crime spikes over the festive season. And when we delved deep into the qualitative data, we learned that women were very worried that excessive substance abuse was going to cause harm to their children and cause upheaval and criminal activity in their communities. Men were far less concerned about that. And that is sort of fairly consonant with what we expected to find. But, as much as people were worried about loneliness, they didn't want to be in crowds. And again, that underlines the fact that it's the quality of the connection that's important. So when we tell people to connect, let's look at what that connection is based on and look at the quality of that connection. Now, we see in terms of coping strategies, getting enough sleep is always something that we recommend. So we're happy that people are concerned about getting enough sleep. However, we don't want that to mean bed rotting. So when we looked at additional coping strategies, people would say, I'm going to numb out on Netflix. I'm going to avoid and sleep. I'm going to sleep through the season. It's too overwhelming. I can't be part of this. So while getting enough sleep is important, we must be careful not to over egg it and get too much sleep. In fact, if we take a look at these stats, we'll see that going outside for a walk is good because that doesn't cost money. A lot of the time, you can just pop out of your front door and do it. And we've been moving for mental health via SADAG this whole year. So I'm so pleased to see people are moving for mental health. But this idea that we're going to take a break from social media. Not enough people are saying that. Journaling. Journaling is so important. New research has just come out to suggest that when we write, we develop strong mental resilience. And only 11% are thinking about it that way. So it's very, very important that under other coping strategies, that's huge. At 21%, we're seeing a lot of sedentary coping. But something positive there is we're seeing a lot of spiritual coping as well. People are tuning to a broader sense of meaning and purpose, which is wonderful to see. And some people are saying, I'm going to exercise more. I'm going to see my doctor. I'm going to go and see my doctor before the festive season because I know it stresses me out and I'm going to find a way to cope. I'm going to increase my medication. So it's not to suggest that people are coping poorly, but it is to suggest that there's this tendency towards numbing out. And again, we're seeing more numbing out happening amongst our male respondents. So I've said a lot, and I just want to quickly run through what we've contributed to the festive fable, particularly around men. So around men, I discovered something so interesting in the statistics, and that is that men and women have different psychological distress reports. So when they answer the Kessler 10 items, do you know women are far more psychologically distressed than men? So men are not just disconnecting from other people or disconnecting because they're worried about their financial capacity. Men are disconnecting from themselves because we know that the suicide risk is higher for men. So what on earth is going on? So I had to find a roundabout way to see what these men are talking about. And what we noticed when we went through the findings was that there was a strong linkage between being male and having OCD. So men are actually overrepresented in terms of OCD in the sample. And that's around an issue of control, isn't it? And then we found the connection between OCD and depression. So men aren't saying, I'm depressed directly, but depressed men are getting us higher scores in terms of OCD. So there's a comorbidity there. There's something that's interesting there. With control as the central element here. So you'll say, well, how are they controlling things that they disconnect from? They're controlling how connected they'll be. And so in trying to control these depressed feelings, some of the men are turning towards obsessive compulsive behaviors, and other men are turning away from it and just disconnecting completely. So, if money is the ultimate masculinity signifier, we really need to do more than just put men in therapy and say, you have worth. We need gender role resocialization through organizations that are represented here today, whether you're in a corporate setting, whether you're in an NGO setting, whether you're in a government setting. We need this gender role resocialization that men have inherent value because for women, they see their value as seeing and connecting and then only look at the money side. When we look at social connection, if men are so terrified that they are going to be cut off because they don't have enough money, there's something in the quality of those connections that we need to look at. We need a supportive quality connection where even families themselves might need the therapy. It is possible to be lonely in the crowd. As I said, women, they have got that social capital, but it's not gained for free. So if everyone's engaging in high quality social interaction, that's part of the solution. I won't dwell too long on this slide because, as I've said, less privileged men can be happy. And so this crude grasp of poverty, oh, well, you're from South Africa, you must be poor, is unhelpful. We are seeing people at the top and the bottom end of the economic scale who are struggling to create the dream Christmas that they want for themselves and that they want to give others. Why are educated men in Kutbudin studies more likely to suicide than lesser educated men? I'm not saying that education is always a signifier of wealth, but in South Africa it can be, considering that Kutbudin's study ran from the late 90s into 2016. People really, really are struggling financially, still want their kids to have a dream Christmas, and January is every day, especially for those with minor kids. What's really interesting is that diagnosed persons are not as psychologically distressed as non-diagnosed people. And just because you haven't been professionally diagnosed doesn't mean that you're not aware that you have got symptoms, as is illustrated by one of our respondents in this quote. I have many symptoms of depression, general anxiety disorder, and addiction. Then we looked outside. If we go for a walk outside, are we getting too much sun versus too little sun? People are worried about the summer heat, but it isn't actually a gendered or economic or employed or anything based issue. I think that we're seeing a little bit of climate change, but the big sort of climate change angle that we were looking at in terms of are we paying a festive sun tax didn't come about. And then, of course, our missing middle, our vulnerable people are aged 26 to 35. And that's a really important thing to notice. So let's bear in mind that men and women are equally lonely, but men are feeling more isolated and women are more concerned about safety and crime spikes. So when we talk to people about their worries, these concerns are very real, and we shouldn't frame them as something that we don't want to talk about. In fact, we should talk more and more about what specifically concerns our callers when they ring through to us over the Christmas period. Now, in terms of coping, as I said, it's very important. Okay, so how are we going to reset? The first thing we have to do when we reset is we have to think about connection and contemplation. Any activity that allows you to form a meaningful connection with others is important. And anything that allows you to contemplate or with your feelings or just allow yourself to feel what you feel will allow for a more effective period of reflection and reset. If you want to do the Netflix marathon, do it. But why not do it with your family? Why not find a show that you're all obsessed with? Sit together, talk about what's happening in the show, create your fan theories, and connect via the Netflix. It doesn't always have to be a disconnecting force. Reset and rest are so crucially reconnecting with one another. A rest is not when we numb ourselves out. A rest involves mindfulness and not mindlessness. So when we rest, remember, when you rest from something, you can be doing something else. What else are you doing? And how can you create continuity into the new year in a way that works for you in the most mindful way and in a way that lets you deal with your feelings? So I'll just conclude with one simple example. Let's say you have a dreadful relative that you just don't want to deal with this Christmas. Instagram will tell you, cut that person off and never see them again. But what if you can't do that? What if there are intimate connections? What if there are other family members who want to spend time with that person and you want to spend time with them? The way to write the best festive fable for yourself is to go into that situation and take mini breaks from that particular relative. Walk in with strong boundaries. Remember, your boundary is not a rule that you make that they have to follow. Your boundary is a statement that you make calmly of what's going to happen if they don't respect it. So if they don't respect it, then perhaps you might leave early. If they don't respect it, you might not come to every family event and that sort of thing. Or if they don't respect it, you'll just ask them nicely not to talk about that particular subject matter. So when you set the boundary, be healthy, strive for healthy connections, and remember, allowing yourself to just feel what you feel is important. Avoiding all triggers is unhelpful, but distracting yourself when you feel overwhelmed can be useful. But distraction is a temporary measure, not a long term solution. So I want to thank all of you once again for listening to me. I've got a lot more that I would love to share with you, and I look forward to your questions. Thank you very much. Over to you, Cassie.
Sure. Thanks so much, Dr. Brodwin. I wish you could see the comments and the responses. It's so insightful. I think when we have the numbers and the information and we've got the data, it really paints a picture. I already see so many people sharing how significant it is, how they're going to use it in their specific sector or department or team. So it's so incredibly useful. We have indeed received some questions, and I would like to remind everyone who's joining us live on Zoom or on Facebook, please do pop your questions in the comment section, and we're going to tackle the Q&A, which is really the exciting application part of taking the data and saying, how do we make meaning? How do we use this? And I think it's always such an important part when SADAG is ever involved in any kind of gathering of research or insights is we want to know, how does this make an impact? How do we use this? How do we take that forward to help more people? And I think one of the things that's really significant, and you've touched on it quite a few times, is around some of the survey showing the big differences between men and women, and especially how they're coping. How can families, workplaces, and communities better support men, especially those who withdraw from women in their lives, who feel overwhelmed by responsibilities?
Wow, that's such a great question. If I could answer that, I think we'd have a much better reality, but I'm going to try. I'll take a shot at it. I think that what's really important is for men and women and children and older folk, everybody to try to, when we communicate, to communicate that we have inherent value. So we can be grateful and we must notice when people have use value. In other words, whatever someone does for you, a thank you goes a really long way. But I think that this idea that there's inherent value, that we help men in particular to disconnect from this idea that if they don't have money, they have less worth, and if they have more money, they have more worth. That's important. And then I think in terms of control, so just my second point, it's good to want to control your environment. It's better to want to control yourself. So if you have a tendency to want to control a situation, look at how you can frame that situation and how you're reacting or responding in the situation. And, I think the combination of self-control and the imperative around self-control and self-worth would be really, really beneficial. So just think about how we speak to people. Is there one kind thing you can say? Or is there one way that you see someone did connect with their feelings in a helpful way, particularly a man, and thank him for that vulnerability and notice it? I think those are some of the strategies that could be useful. So that's more on the personal level. I think in the workplace, it's probably a lot different and a lot trickier because obviously we do have pay scales and things like that. But every job counts and every job is inherently valued. And I think perhaps we could start bringing that kind of language into our places of work and into our homes, which I think would help.
Mm. And I think I love what you've also said in how we're communicating. It's not just to assume that the partner or the person in your life, husband, brother, friend, that they know their value. It's maybe one of the insights is that we need to remind them and say it out loud, especially during this time when they're feeling more vulnerable. So that's really practical, really helpful. Um, so what was really interesting, and I think we've discussed this before, is that South African culture, we work the entire year, we work long and hard, all for this little break at the end of the year where we're supposed to reset, recharge, rejuvenate during the often the busiest times of the year, and then hit the ground running with January. And I know a lot of those themes came out in the survey findings, but you mentioned the importance of a reset. which I think is not a word that we use enough over this time. What does this concept mean in really practical terms? And how can South Africans adopt it to protect their mental well-being this December?
Yeah, I mean, I think a reset means different things to different people. But I think we've got to be careful with this idea of the reset, as I've said, around cycles.
Mm.
So, I mean, you can reset on the 15th of October, you can reset on the 12th of June. So it's about intentionality. So it's sort of saying, what is one thing I can do? So sort of break your life up into quadrants, okay? So the one would be your physical health, the one would be your financial health, the one would be your relational health, and then the one would be your sort of social contribution. In other words, what are we doing broadly to be more active citizens? Because sometimes an act of helping helps you to reset more than just focusing on me, 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 So we've got to think about these things. And you'll pick your own quadrants, right? You'll sort of say, okay, in my family life, what can I do to facilitate something with my partner? What can I
Mm.
do with my children? What simple thing can I do? So, for example, it can be something basic like I'm just not going to eat candy after dinner, or I'm just not going to look at screens an hour before bed. In other words, it's a small practical thing, or I'm going to go on one walk every day.
Mm.
And I'm going to block it off on my calendar and I'm going to commit to it. So the thing about the reset is it starts with you. It starts with the I. And then it can go to the we, and then it can go to the us or the broader community sense. So, one thing for your own health and well being. And it's got to be something that's real. So, I mean, completing a Netflix marathon will give you the dopamine hit, but you must complete a task. So, if you want to do things in terms of resetting, I think it's very important that we work on one thing for I, one thing for we, and one thing for us. But every one of the things that we work on has to be a little task that we complete. So, I'm going to go for a daily walk. I'm going to invite my spouse with me so we actually get some time to chat. And then what am I going to do for my community? Well, maybe I'm going to pick up trash on the sidewalk when I go for that walk. So, can you see it's these three simple, small things that we do that can create like a little trio of blessings. And then you build up the next one. And then you go for two walks a day, or you cut out that candy after dinner, or whatever you're doing. So think about what's draining you and then work it out. So, a lot of people are in debt. Can you consolidate that debt in any way? Is there a way you can make it smaller? You can't pay off your 500,000 Rand debt. That's far too much. You're not going to pay off your house in a day. But can you pay off that store card and then maybe cut up that card and pop it in the back of your wallet and don't use it for 2026? It creates a mini financial reset. So the thing for me with reset is that it's about closing windows in the brain. Close as many windows as you can, you get energy back. And when you get energy back, you can tackle the rest. So it's really just about starting small. I, we, and us.
I'm just writing this down so that I can remind myself over the festive season because I think it's sometimes those reminders, and I think you just made it so practical. Is like once we can close those windows, we can actually have the energy to tackle some of those other things, especially the things at this time of the year that we've often put at the bottom of our priority list, which is often, like you say, ourselves and our relationships, which we know has such a profound impact on our emotional well-being. So those are great nuggets that we're definitely going to use. I have a really interesting question from Busisiwe, who's joined us on Zoom, saying that they're really interested in whether or in what ways does religion play, considering the fact that 80% of South Africans are Christian and the festive season to many has religious connotations. Is there anything that came up about religion, whether it being their coping mechanism or being unable to address their depression around this time?
That's a great question as well. I think I was very happy to see that I got a lot of positivity around anything spiritual. So around Christianity, there was a lot of talk around prayerful behavior. So it wasn't just a question of I'm going to pray as if it were a laundry list and then, it's going to be provided. It was more a question of I'm going to want to be strengthened through my faith. I'm going to work on myself. And so again, it comes back to that issue of can we control ourselves? How do we reset ourselves? And Christianity obviously has a very powerful reset mechanism. If you think about it, it's quite powerful. And the way that respondents were talking about it, they would say, when I'm stressed, I will pray. When I don't have money, I will pray. When I'm tired, I will pray. So there was a real sense of that, but there was also a sense of growth through the prayer. So once I pray, I will have understanding, I will have strength, and I will continue. So it's connecting to a larger whole. So again, it's still part of what I'm saying when I say contemplation and connection. Prayer is a perfect example of those two things together.
Brilliant. Thank you for that. We have another question from Amanda from our Facebook stream. And I know that we've touched on some of the findings around men and even men with OCD. This is a question that says, has your study found a significant increase in depression and anxiety in the neurodivergent community during the festive season, taking into account that many already suffer from some form of anxiety?
That's a really good question as well. I keep saying these are good questions, but they are all brilliant, and
Very
I'm so
good.
delighted that people are really engaging. Um, but the one aspect that I can speak to is that we didn't obviously measure that directly, and we should. And I'll tell you why we should, not just because of this superb question, but because it did come out in the data. So when we said to people, do you have any other mental health challenges that you've been diagnosed with? Then the other column lit up with neurodivergence. So we've got a lot of autism. We've got a lot of people talking about complex cases of attention deficit, which some may define as neurodivergent and some may not. But it's important that our respondents are self-defining as neurodivergent. So we do need to explore that connection between the two things. What I will say is that it wasn't just the people who reported neurodivergence who said that they needed to be on their own, who just couldn't connect with others and who were feeling quite worried about their social battery running down. So I think that you don't have to be neurodivergent for that stress to impact you. But yes, this is definitely something we need to explore in the next round. If there's going to be a next round, Cassie, you'll tell me. But
No,
it's definitely
I
an
got
angle.
excited when you said that because I think there's such a gap for getting more of this kind of data and this lived experience data that can tell us so much and that we can share it is often research. There can be big gaps around research and especially mental health research. So I was very chuffed that you have mentioned, in the next round, and now it's public. So Dr. Brodwin, we're definitely going to be doing it. I have a lot of witnesses because I think there's so much we can gather and learn from each other and actually use to make a big difference. So I'm very excited. I'm going to do a couple of more questions and then we're going to just go through some of the support services that SADAG can provide as well. And then we'll just share some of the resources that we'll be sharing with everyone. So we've had a question from an HR manager who has asked, with this information, how should myself as a team leader use this to better support my staff or employees? Any go-to tips from this webinar?
Goodness. Okay. So I don't want to borrow too much from our working life study from last year, but I'm going to sort of connect the two dots if you'll indulge me, Cassie. I think that the first thing is that, we need to perhaps sit with people and work out what does psychological safety feel like in this team? What are the boundaries? What's good? What's bad? What works for us? And so, in that small group way, as an HR manager, I know that a lot of EAP programs are being completely defunded because of all sorts of economic imperatives. So often it becomes the HR, it devolves to you as the HR manager. I'm sure that you're probably nodding your head with me here. And none of us always feel particularly well equipped to just sort of handle these things. So I think it's about developing those healthy connections and bringing that inherent value to each person. And one of the ways of valuing people isn't going, I value you, this is what I'm going to do for you. It's also about saying there's an open environment where we can communicate what our concerns are. So, as an HR manager, if you can, maybe that half day for someone to go off and be at their child's sports event or at the child's Christmas play, that would be immensely useful. I think a wellness day is always a wonderful idea, but then we sort of we make it one day of the year and then we just forget about it. So how can we imbue the environment with wellness? One of the things we can do is create close relationships and give people as much decision-making power as possible. Because once people get as much decision-making power as possible, you'll find that they're more vocal about their needs, and then you can get that sort of communication stream going. So that would just be my response off the cuff, although it's a lot more complex than that.
Mm. And I can see, yeah, there's some really great comments just about how helpful and practical. And I think it's those small things that you are able to do that make a big difference, especially at this time of year. And I think it's always nice to hear from there's a real community of HR managers and team leaders as to some of the things that they've done that has maybe worked for their teams. And we can
Mm.
also learn through that. Um, I have another question, and then I'm going to come to your message of hope as we wrap up. Is that there's a question that came through that often there is this trap and pressure, and I think you've even mentioned social media, of what Christmas is supposed to look like from the movies and in the adverts and even the stores that are so decorated. It is always supposed to be joyful and busy and full. But there's this overwhelming theme of that it doesn't have to be like that. And for many people, from the results that we've seen, it's not like that, and that it's okay not to be okay. Do you want to talk to that around the trap that Christmas often sets up, that unrealistic expectation, and how to
Mm.
perhaps even navigate that?
I think you're so right, Cassie. And I think that, I mean, social media is the vehicle for this, right? So it's always been there. We've always had our Hallmark cards and a couple of Christmas movies. But here in the global South, we've always actually just done it our way. And why don't we just do that? Why don't we? I mean, we don't have snow for goodness sake. Why are we importing like snow machines? I mean, what's the point? So in other words, I think we have to break the mental shackle first.
Mm.
But but I think that's something that everyone always says about social media, and we're all addicted to it anyway. So I mean, we can reduce consumption and that'll help. But I think what really, really helps is take a look at the people that you like, that you actually want to spend time with, and maybe just have a really open conversation about what irks you about Christmas, what can't you stand. So, for example, my children, I hate it when I spend all day cooking at Christmas. They were, but Mom, we don't get to see you. So now I don't have to cook this Christmas. We're doing something completely different. So, you think that you're doing the right thing as a parent, and then you're actually not because the children didn't even like what you were doing. So I think it's important to sit down and have those honest conversations with people. Some people are very uncomfortable receiving gifts. Just very uncomfortable. And some people are so anxious in giving the gift. I don't know if any of you have had this experience, but I've had relatives and friends who've been so anxious. They've sort of given me the gift with the shaking hands, and you think, oh goodness, why did you do that? It would have been lovely. Don't worry. I just want the gift of your time. And you can just sort of say to that relative, don't buy a gift. We won't exchange gifts this year. Come and have a coffee with me, and we'll have some Christmas cake and we'll chat. We'll gossip about our neighbors. We'll have fun. And so I think it's really about consciously taking the pressure off by talking to people about what their expectations are. Now, we're always going to have someone who's got those high level expectations. Sit down together and say, I would love to buy you that. I would love to go on that holiday with you. You deserve it. You mean the world to me. But as you know, I've been unemployed for 6 months of this year. So, what can I do within this limited budget? What would be the best thing I could do? And then people sort of foster that connection within the limitation and the reasonableness of expectations.
Suppose it's just having that conversation. And that's why I also love that we've done the survey and got these findings before Christmas is really upon us and the festive season is here. It feels like it's a short time away, but we often have these types of conversations or these hindsight moments of I should have done this or I should have done this differently, or I could have done that. Whereas now, at least, we're empowered with this information now that can help us to have these conversations, that can be help us to be more intentional going into the festive season, and hopefully navigate some of those stresses and anxiety. And I think give people back the control that often when you get on that bandwagon for the festive season, it takes us away, and we kind of only pop out again in January. So I think it's so important that we're all learning and we're sharing. And I think one of my call to action to anyone who is joining today is to be able to share this information with someone else who might need to hear it, who might need the reminder, who might just need the conversation. And I think that's a really practical way forward. Dr. Bronwyn, we could talk for hours. There's so much more from the research, and I encourage everyone. We are recording the session. We will share the slides and the infographic with everyone via email after today's session. But we will give you all of our contact details. So if you're writing a press story or you're hosting a support group meeting tonight, or you want to share this with your teams, you will have our contact details to please reach out to us, and we would be happy to share and for people to use this information. And that's why we've also kept this public, is we want this to spread, and we want people to use it and apply it and use it in so many different ways so that it can help someone in their circle. Dr. Bronwyn, your last words of hope, insight, as we end off the webinar, and next steps for the festive season.
I think I just want to leave everyone with this message, and this goes for everyone who answered the survey call, everyone who's watching this, and everyone who might have anything to do with us during this festive season, and everyone who doesn't, right? Um, I guarantee you, I absolutely know this. You matter to somebody. You matter a lot more to people than you realize. People are inattentive creatures, we all know, and our attention spans are getting shorter and smaller, but you do matter to somebody. And you might say to me, well, no, Bronwyn, I don't, because everyone who I ever mattered to has passed on. Yes, but you're their legacy. They left you behind because you matter. So I think that whenever it feels as if I shouldn't rest now, or I shouldn't do this, or I shouldn't do that, remember, you matter, the reset matters. And it's always, always going to be that the sun will come out tomorrow. And I want all of you to be here with me to see it. So that's my final message, Cassie.
Thank you so, so much for your wisdom and those nuggets. And I already see people who are hosting meetings and doing presentations at year-end function. I love that this topic can be high on the agenda when it's so needed. So thank you. Now, what's really important is that once we know all this information, how do we use it? How are we going to provide support? And I think this is where I'm going to introduce our call center supervisor, or where to, who will be talking just briefly about some of the SADAG support services that are available over the festive season. Where to, over to you.
Thank you so much, Cassie. And I want to thank Dr. Bronwyn for actually raising such important information and unpacked what the festive season feels like. And I think what comes out the most is that there's loneliness, and there's these feelings of uncertainty around the festive season. And so what I would like to share is the most important part, which answers perhaps a lot of the questions that our viewers might have today, which is, where can I get assistance? Where can I get help if I am one of the people who are feeling this way, and who's feeling anxious, and who's feeling depressed, and feeling really, really apprehensive about the festive season? And I'm here to tell you that there is help. Our helplines are available 24/7, 365 days of the year. This means that during Christmas, during the day and at night, we will be available, and there is a counselor who is well trained, who's going to assist you, who's going to listen to you, and is going to give you a shoulder to cry on. And then we also have our WhatsApp chat lines that are available from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. And behind that screen is a counselor who is dedicated and is well trained to chat to you and to help you resolve whatever it is that you might be going through. We also have an online platform called Contact a Counselor, where you can fill in an online form on our website, www.sadag.org, and have a counselor call you back. We then also have our SMS lines, which are also available 24 hours, where you can send an SMS as simple as hi, and a counselor will call you back as soon as possible. So please reach out. Please know that there is someone there out there to help you and to assist you during this time, because it's so important that you get someone who listens to you and who wants to assist you. Thank you so much. Over to you, Cass.
Thank you so much, Alweta, and to all of our amazing counselors, our team and our volunteers who will be manning the call center throughout the festive season. Just a very special thank you. I think during these times, having that human connection and the other person on the other side of the phone who's got lived experience, has come from different walks of life, it's so important to connect, especially during this time. I'm now going to welcome our support group coordinator, Miss Anita, to share a little bit about some of the support groups and the power of support groups over the festive season. Over to you.
Thank you, Cassie, for that. Yes, so our support group, we have so many support groups running, and we have over 180 support groups. And with that said, it's this time, it's the festive season, and many of our support groups will be closed over the festive season. However, we do have many of the groups that will be open as well. So it's so important that you can find these groups. You can even call our call center, like Uweti gave you the details, or you're welcome to visit our website on www.sadag.org, and you can go to our support groups. And under our support groups running, you'll see this lovely poster that's on your screen at the moment, which shows you all our support groups, and it's got a note to say, click here to see the support groups running. So once you click on there, Cass, if we go to the next slide, you'll be able to go through all the support groups that will be running over the festive season. With this said, we have 14 groups that will be open over the festive season. That's made up of online groups as well as your face-to-face, which is your in-person groups. So these are just going through the slides. These are all the groups that would be open, and you're more than welcome to go through them, visit the website, etc., and look at all the information that's there. And I have seen some of the questions that have come up on the chat to say where can they go and what can they do. And so I'll also talk a little bit about that as to what happens and how you could reach out. So we'll go to the next slide. So these are all the groups that are running. Okay, thanks, Cass. Okay, so for those that asked the question of wanting to join a support group or wanting to start a support group as well, knowing that support groups are there, and these groups, like we know, it's not therapy, but it's groups that are run by patients for patients, and it's with people with very similar lived experiences that all come to these group meetings. They talk about their lived experience, what they've been through, and this actually helps people to open up, to find a safe space. And especially this time of year, you need that. You might not be on talking terms to family members, but you need someone that you don't know, someone that you can talk to and express what you're feeling. So you're more than welcome to visit the website. For those that want to join a support group, you're welcome to click on, like you can see, this is on our website. You're welcome to go through what joining a support group is all about. You can then also call our call center, and they'll go through the screening process with you. They'll advise you on what groups are available, and especially over the festive season, there are a limited number of groups that are open during this time, because a lot of our support group leaders have been doing this for the entire year, and they also do need a break. They need to spend time with their families, etc. But there are groups available. And for those that want to start a support group, you're more than welcome to. You've got the lived experience, and yes, either call the call center and they'd give you all the information and where to send an email to. So you'd be given the email address as well to, if you'd like to start a support group. And if we could please just go to the next slide, Cass. So I just want to say, with the new year coming up, we have new support groups that are scheduled to launch in January. We've already got 3, which is the functional neurological disorder group. We've got a support group for parents of neurodivergent children. It's something that we need in our communities. And then if we go to the next slide, please, Cass. And that's the other group that we have for a mental health support group for IBS and digestive issues. So if you see all these groups, there is a support group for the needs that we have. And hey, if there isn't a support group for what you want, then please do get in touch with us and we'll find a group that you could possibly start, or start a group so you can have members join, because sometimes there are groups and there are people looking for something, and by starting a group, it's so important that we can get that awareness out there for people to join the groups. So for all the information or everything that I just said, you're welcome to find it on our website, which is www.sadag.org, or you're welcome to call us on our call center numbers that already discussed. So that's all from me, from the support group side. Thank you very much, and have a great festive season. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Miss Anita. And we will also share in the comment section your direct email and details as well for anyone who wants to join or start a support group. We're also very excited that January we also kick off Support Group Awareness Week. So there'll be a lot of new groups and activity around that. So thank you. I'm now going to hand over to Daniel. As an NGO, it is also an important time for us, and we want to give alternatives to buying that big Christmas present under the tree. So Daniel's going to be talking to all of the corporates and people who want to give a donation this year that has huge meaning and that could save a life. Daniel, over to you.
Thank you so much, Cassie. I definitely think that Bronwyn, Awetu, and Anita have highlighted how there is such a need for help, and that SADAG is there to answer the call for help. And as you know, that with running so many projects and programs, that does come at a cost. So I'm here today to ask everyone listening to give the gift of hope this season. As we enter the festive season, which is a time for joy for many, but overwhelming loneliness for others, we're asking for your support to help us continue being the safe space for thousands of South Africans who reach out in their darkest moments. December is historically one of our busiest moments or months, and SADAG remains open throughout the year. While families gather and routines shift, many experience mental health crises, financial stress, grief, depression, and anxiety. And for many, SADAG is the only place they can turn to. So I'm encouraging you, all of you listening, that your donation this festive season can change someone's life. And as I know a couple have mentioned, but SADAG receives over 3,000 calls a day, and each call is a cry for help. So your contribution helps keep our lines open to support those in need of support. There are 3 simple ways that you can help support SADAG this festive season and give the gift of hope. One is visiting our Back a Buddy page to make a donation. As I mentioned, SADAG receives over 3,000 calls, and this helps us ensure that each one is someone asking for help, and your donation will ensure no call goes unanswered, and no one in crisis hears a busy signal. So please do visit www.backabuddy.co.za and search for the South African Depression and Anxiety Group, or for short SADAG. One donation, or you can make one donation or set a recurring donation, which helps us year round. And every cent truly helps and counts and makes a difference. And for those of the runners out here or in this, or have family members who are runners, we have an incredible initiative called Lace Up for Mental Health. Lace Up for Mental Health was actually founded by the Pirates Running Club after they tragically lost one of their runners to suicide. This reminded their community that for the need to talk openly and about mental health and how running connects people. It shares miles and moments within their tribe. That's why the Pirates Running Club created the Green Laces, a small but powerful reminder that help is always available and that you are not alone. So this festive season, I encourage you all to buy a meaningful gift of Lace Up for Mental Health shoelaces. And you can do that by visiting laceup.co.za. They cost 80 Rand per pair, and all the funds go towards supporting SADAG. So please, if you have friends, family, or if you are running yourself, do go visit this page and check out these really awesome green laces. They do stand out and make your kicks look fancy. And last but not least, certainly not least, you can donate directly to SADAG by visiting our website, www.sadag.org, and clicking on the donate button in the top left of the website. Or you can scan this QR code on the slide as I talk a bit about why it's important to donate to SADAG. It helps us keep our 30+ helplines running, ensuring that when someone calls in a crisis, there is a trained counselor on the other end of the line, ready to listen and ready to help. Your donation also supports our rural counseling containers, which bring mental health services directly into underserved communities, which access care where it is extremely limited. We are able to reach vulnerable schools across Gauteng through our school outreach program, which provides mental health education, early intervention, and emotional support to learners who may be experiencing trauma, anxiety, or depression, or even stress and exam stress at such a young age. Your support also allows us to maintain more than 180 nationwide support groups both online and in person, giving people ongoing connection, understanding, and hope beyond that first call for help. Every one of your donations, no matter the size, helps us continue making mental health support accessible, compassionate, and available to everyone who needs it. So please, for those of you who are watching, for those corporates that are watching, I do encourage you to make a donation today. And again, no matter the size, it truly does make a difference and helps us give the gift of hope to those who need it most. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dan. And I think it's a perfect reminder let me just do that, a perfect reminder of what we need in that gift of sharing. And I think it's great options from shoelaces to the backpack to SADAG's website, because every rand donated to SADAG goes towards saving a life. We're now at the end of our webinar, and we've been very honored to have lots of different press and media join us today. And I just want to give you a reminder for anyone who's writing an article or who would like an interview or even more information from today's webinar and findings, to please reach out to our press and media team. You can email them on media@anxiety.org.za or press@anxiety.org.za, and we can organize experts, more information, SADAG experts, even lived experience to help share and create awareness around mental health over the festive season. We also want to remind everyone that has joined us today, and we even saw some comments in the chat box about dealing with grief, is that this Friday we're going to be having our last Ask the Expert, where you can join us on our Facebook page at 1 o'clock with counseling psychologist Dylan Bennon, talking about how to cope with grief over the festive season, especially when it can be so hard and heavy. What are some of the practical ways to cope with this heavy loss and sadness over the festive season so that you too can find joy and peace during this difficult time? To everyone who has joined, who have shared in the chat box and left comments or responded, to the SADAG team, to everyone that's been part of and shared their lived experience in the survey, thank you. Thank you for showing up. Thank you for sharing, and thank you for helping us to help so many more people. Another reminder is that SADAG will be open throughout the festive season. Please look for all of our contact details. You'll find us through our website. Please keep following us on social media, as we will be sharing day-to-day tips on how to cope, resources, and just letting you know that you're not alone and that there is always help in the time of need. To everyone else, have a wonderful festive season. Look after yourself, and I hope that you get to prioritize your mental health during this time. See you all soon. Bye-bye.
Bye bye. You can say bye bye.